The Sultan's eyes were chips of obsidian. "They say you can cast a mouth of bronze that can swallow a city," Mehmed II said, his voice a low threat. "I have a city in mind." Across from him, a hulking Hungarian engineer named Orban shifted his weight. He was a man of charcoal-stained hands and colossal appetites, a master of the dark art of gunpowder, and this was the most important sales pitch of his life. He had already offered his services to the other side. Just weeks before, he had stood in a dusty, threadbare hall in Constantinople, facing men who wore the title of Roman emperor but possessed an empty treasury. They had offered him a pittance, a salary barely enough to feed his assistants. "We lack the funds," Emperor Constantine XI had told him, his voice heavy with the weariness of a dying empire, "and God willing, our walls will protect us as they always have." God, Orban thought, did not pay invoices. So he walked away, taking his secrets with him. Now, sitting in the opulent tent of the 21-year-old Ottoman Sultan, surrounded by silks and the smell of ambition, Orban knew he was in the presence of a different kind of power. Mehmed II did not speak of God or history, he spoke of results. He had gold. He had will. And he had a terrifying, world-breaking impatience. "Your walls, the walls of Babylon themselves, they will turn to dust before my creations," Orban promised, his voice thick with a salesman's bravado. In that moment, a contract was sealed. It wasn't just for a cannon. It was a death warrant for an empire, signed in greed and gunpowder. The greatest siege of the age was about to begin, and its outcome would be decided not by a king or a knight, but by a mercenary engineer and the monster he was about to build. For over 1,000 years, they were the world's final argument. The walls of Constantinople. Not one wall, but a symphony of defense, an engineered ecosystem of stone, moat, and tower stretching 4 miles across the peninsula. To approach them was to face a series of escalating nightmares. First, a 60-foot wide moat, deep and menacing, ready to be flooded. If you crossed it, you would face the low outer wall, the protikisma, a crenellated parapet manned by archers. Survive that, and you entered the peribolos, a wide terrace, a killing field with no cover. Ahead of you loomed the true obstacle, the inner wall, the megataichos, the Great Wall. 40 feet high, 16 feet thick, and studded with 96 massive towers, each a self-contained fortress capable of raining down arrows, rocks, and Greek fire. This was not just a wall, it was a geological feature, a man-made mountain range that had defeated Persians, Arabs, Bulgars, and even earlier Ottoman armies. They were less a fortification and more a fact of nature, an arrogant statement in stone. Inside, another man prayed to the same god as his enemies. Emperor Constantine XI Paleologos, the last man to ever hold the title of Roman emperor. He was a ghost ruling a ghost empire. The city, once a vibrant metropolis of 500,000 souls, was now a sad, hollowed-out relic of its former glory, with a population of perhaps 50,000 people rattling around inside a shell built for 1,000,000. Vast fields and abandoned ruins lay within the very walls meant to protect them. He had just 7,000 soldiers to defend 14 miles of wall. 10 Ottoman soldiers for every one of his. His hope wasn't in stone or steel. It was in time. He prayed for Venetian ships, for Hungarian knights, for a miracle from the Christian West that had all but abandoned him after centuries of religious schism. He knew Mehmed, the young, hungry sultan across the water, was building something. Whispers had reached him of furnaces burning day and night in Edirne, of a new kind of weapon. But what could break walls that had broken the will of 20 armies before? Constantine was clinging to history. But Mehmed wasn't interested in history. He was interested in making it. And his instrument of change was already taking shape. The blueprint was pure arrogance. A cannon 27 feet long, with a bronze barrel 8 inches thick. A bore so wide a man could crawl inside. A weapon designed to fire a 600-pound stone ball over a mile with terrifying force. Orban, the Hungarian gunsmith, now fabulously wealthy, oversaw it all. This was his masterpiece, his legacy, and his payday. Mehmed gave him unlimited resources. Carts of copper and tin arrived daily. Armies of laborers dug massive casting pits in the earth, lined with clay and reinforced with timber. The foundry fires in Edirne turned the night sky a hellish orange. For 3 months, the work was relentless, a frantic, dangerous ballet of metallurgy and manpower. Mehmed himself would ride out from his palace, a silent, menacing figure, watching the progress. His viziers, old men who had advised his father, whispered that it was madness. They were men like Khalil Pasha, who believed in diplomacy and tradition, not in these new, vulgar weapons. Too big, too expensive, too dangerous, they muttered. The walls are eternal. Your father tried and failed, one dared to say. Mehmed's glare was ice. My father was not me. And he did not have this. Finally, the day of the test firing came. The massive bronze tube, cooled and cleaned, was named the Basilica. It was more than a cannon, it was a statement. They dragged it to a field outside the city, loaded it with an enormous quantity of black powder, and rammed home the stone shot. With a slow match, they lit the fuse. The explosion was unlike anything ever heard. Not a crack, but a physical roar that shook the ground for miles, shattered windows in the city, and was said to have caused pregnant women to miscarry. The stone ball flew for a mile before burying itself 6 feet in the earth. It was a success. A terrifying, world-altering success. Orban was a genius. Mehmed was a visionary. But now came the real challenge. The monster had been born, but its target was 150 miles away. A special road had to be prepared. Bridges were reinforced by engineers like Saruka Pasha. A dedicated crew of 60 oxen and over 400 men was assembled for the journey. For 2 months, they dragged the multi-ton behemoth across the muddy plains of Thrace. It was a slow, grinding funeral procession for the Byzantine Empire, a testament to Mehmed's iron will. The world had never seen a logistical operation on this scale for a single piece of weaponry. This wasn't just a cannon anymore. It was the centerpiece of a revolution in warfare. As the shadow of the great cannon crept toward the city, a ship slipped through the new Ottoman blockade at the Bosphorus. On its deck stood a man who represented Constantinople's last, best hope. His name was Giovanni Giustiniani Longo, a Genoese soldier of fortune, a condottiero renowned throughout the Mediterranean as an expert in siege defense. He was a professional warrior in a city of civilians, a man who understood the brutal mathematics of a siege. He brought with him 700 of the best trained and equipped mercenaries in the world, 400 from Genoa and 300 from Rhodes and Chios, a private army funded by his own fortune. Emperor Constantine didn't just welcome him, he promised him the island of Lemnos if they were victorious and made him commander of the entire land defense. Giustiniani was everything Constantine was not, a hardened pragmatist, a master of logistics and engineering. While the emperor prayed and delivered speeches about faith and history, Giustiniani worked. He walked every foot of the Theodosian Walls, his expert eye assessing every crack, every weakness. He immediately identified the central section, the Mesotikion near the St. Romanus Gate where the ground dipped, as the most vulnerable point. He redistributed the small garrison, placing his elite, heavily armored Genoese at this critical juncture. He organized the terrified civilians into repair crews, stockpiling barrels of earth, timber, stone, and animal hides, anything that could be used to patch the wounds the cannons would soon inflict. He was preparing to fight a medieval war of attrition. He was about to face a war from the future. On April 6, 1453, the siege began. The Ottoman army, over 80,000 strong, was a sea of tents and banners stretching to the horizon. And at its center, pointed directly at the St. Romanus Gate, sat Orban's Basilica and a dozen other massive bombards. The first shot was a declaration. The ground trembled. A plume of sulphurous smoke erupted from the bronze mouth, and a black speck soared across the sky. It struck the outer wall with the force of a thunderclap. Stone that had stood for 1,000 years cracked and splintered. Dust and debris rained down. But it held. Giustiniani, standing on the ramparts, felt the impact through the soles of his boots. He watched as his men, pale but resolute, began the frantic work of repairs under his bellowed commands. The battle had begun. It was his expertise against Orban's physics. It was the will of one professional soldier against the ambition of a sultan. The rhythm of the siege was brutal and monotonous. A deafening roar from the cannons, the screech of the stone ball, the shattering impact, and then the desperate scramble to repair the damage before the next shot. The psychological toll was immense. This wasn't the clean, distant warfare of arrows. This was a noisy, earth-shaking, relentless demolition. The Basilica was a flawed monster. Its massive charge generated so much heat and stress that it took 3 hours to cool with oil, clean, and reload. It could only fire 7 times a day. But each of those 7 shots was an earthquake, a hammer blow that pulverized ancient stone. For weeks, Giustiniani's defense was a miracle of engineering and courage. He was everywhere, a whirlwind of energy, directing repairs, encouraging the men, personally fighting on the most dangerous sections of the wall. Under the cover of darkness, his crews, men, women, and children, would swarm the breaches. They didn't have time for mortar. They filled the gaps with rubble, reinforced them with wooden stockades, and draped them with oil-soaked hides to absorb the impact of the next shot. They were healing a stone patient that was dying piece by piece. Inside the city, morale held. They were outnumbered, but they were defiant. While the cannons boomed, another, quieter war was being fought beneath the earth. Mehmed, growing impatient, ordered his Serbian miners to dig tunnels, or saps, to undermine the walls. But Giustiniani had an ace up his sleeve, a Scottish engineer named Johannes Grant. Grant organized counter-mining operations. The defenders would dig their own tunnels, listening for the faint tap-tap-tapping of the enemy miners. When they located a tunnel, they would either collapse it, ambush the miners in vicious underground combat, or destroy them with Greek fire. Time and again, Grant's ingenuity thwarted the Ottoman sappers. For Mehmed, this defiance was infuriating. The siege was costing a fortune. His army was growing restless. He had staked his entire reputation on this conquest, and the ancient walls were mocking him. He turned his fury on Orban. The gunsmith was a hero, but the cannon was too slow. Under pressure, the gun crews pushed the Basilica too hard. And then, disaster. One day, after a firing, a deep crack appeared in the bronze barrel. Some accounts say the cannon collapsed entirely under its own recoil after 6 weeks of firing, killing its own crew and perhaps even Orban himself. The siege's greatest weapon was compromised. For a moment, a flicker of hope ignited in the city. Had God intervened? But Mehmed's genius was not just in ambition, it was in adaptation. He had other large cannons, built by his own Turkish engineers like Saruca, and they continued the relentless bombardment. And he was about to unleash a strategic move so audacious, so unthinkable, that it would crush the defenders' morale completely. The city's northern harbor, the Golden Horn, was its lifeline and its soft underbelly. It was protected by a massive iron chain stretched across the water, a kilometer-long boom preventing the Ottoman navy from entering. As long as that chain held, the city could not be fully surrounded, and the weaker sea walls were safe. On April 22, the defenders on the northern walls woke to an impossible, hallucinatory sight. An Ottoman fleet, not on the water, but on the land. During the night, Mehmed had ordered his men to construct a massive road of greased logs, stretching for over a mile across the hills of the Lada. His soldiers, with the help of thousands of oxen, had physically dragged 70 warships out of the Bosphorus, over a hill 200 feet high, and down into the waters of the Golden Horn, completely bypassing the chain. It was a logistical miracle born of pure, desperate willpower, a feat worthy of Alexander the Great. The psychological blow to the city was even greater than the strategic one. Suddenly, there was no safe place. The defenders, already stretched impossibly thin, now had to man miles of previously secure sea walls. Giustiniani had to pull precious troops away from the main breach, weakening the defense where it was needed most. The city was now an island in a sea of enemies. The end felt closer than ever. Hope flickered one last time when a few Christian ships successfully ran the Ottoman blockade, bringing supplies and news of a potential Venetian relief fleet. But the fleet was small and the hope was fleeting. The noose was tightening. Constantine XI walked the walls, a lonely emperor, offering words of encouragement he no longer felt. His advisors, seeing the hopelessness of the situation, offered him a chance to escape, to rule a lesser province in peace and live. His answer, recorded by the chroniclers, was blunt: God forbid that I should live as an emperor without an empire. As my city falls, I will fall with her. The choice was no longer between victory and defeat. It was between surrender and martyrdom. May 28, 53 days into the siege. An eerie quiet descended over the ruined landscape. The Ottoman cannons, for the first time in weeks, fell silent. Mehmed had declared a day of rest and prayer before the final, all-out assault. He promised his soldiers 3 days of plunder, a promise that ignited a feverish excitement in the camp. Inside the city, the silence was even more terrifying. The bells of Hagia Sophia, the grandest church in Christendom, rang out, calling the people to prayer. In a moment that transcended centuries of bitter religious division, Emperor Constantine XI led a final, solemn procession. Orthodox priests, Catholic cardinals, Venetian merchants, and Genoese mercenaries, men who had squabbled and cursed each other for years, knelt and prayed together. They knew this was the last night of their world. In a final, moving speech, Constantine begged them to fight for their faith, their homeland, and their families, concluding with the plea to forgive one another. They were no longer Greeks or Latins, they were simply defenders of the last remnant of Rome. Before dawn on May 29, the attack began. It was a symphony of destruction, launched under the cover of darkness. The noise was overwhelming, the roar of cannons, the pounding of drums, the blare of trumpets, and the terrifying war cry of 80,000 men. The assault came in 3 waves. First, the irregulars, the Bashibazuks, a chaotic mob of mercenaries and conscripts from across the empire, sent forward as cannon fodder to exhaust the defenders. For 2 hours, Giustiniani and his men held them back, a thin line of steel against a human tide, cutting them down as they tried to scale the battered stockades. Then came the second wave, disciplined, heavily armored Anatolian troops, who hammered at the stockades with grim determination. The fighting was hand-to-hand, brutal, and desperate in the pre-dawn gloom. The defenders were exhausted, wounded, their numbers dwindling, but they held. The line was bending, but it did not break. Then, as the sun began to rise, Mehmed played his final card. He unleashed the Janissaries, his elite personal troops, the finest infantry in the world. They advanced not with wild cries, but in disciplined silence, their relentless advance a terrifying sight. At the height of this final, desperate struggle, fate intervened. A single cannon shot, perhaps from a smaller culverin, struck the parapet where Giustiniani was directing the defense. A piece of shrapnel tore through his chest plate, mortally wounding him. Bleeding and in agony, his nerve broke. He begged his men to take him away from the wall. The emperor rushed to his side, pleading with him to stay, knowing that his presence was the linchpin of the entire defense. But Giustiniani, in shock and pain, insisted on being carried away. The sight of their seemingly invincible commander being taken through a small gate to safety shattered the morale of the Genoese mercenaries. Panic, for the first time in weeks, set in. At that exact, catastrophic moment, a second piece of misfortune struck. A small postern gate to the north, the Kirkaporta, had been left unbolted after a recent sortie. A small band of Janissaries noticed the opening, pushed through, and were suddenly inside the walls. They quickly climbed a nearby tower and raised an Ottoman banner. The cry went up from the Ottoman lines, "The city is taken." The sight of the banner, combined with the disappearance of their commander, caused the defense, so heroic for so long, to collapse into a rout. Emperor Constantine XI was last seen tearing off his purple imperial regalia, saying simply, "The city is fallen and I am still alive." He then drew his sword and led his last remaining men in a final charge into the sea of oncoming Janissaries, where he died an anonymous soldier's death. Giustiniani would die of his wounds a few days later on a Genoese ship. Orban, the man whose cannon had made the breach possible, was reportedly killed during the siege, a victim of his own creation. The fall of Constantinople wasn't just the end of an empire. It was the moment 1,000 years of defensive strategy, of walls and castles, was proven obsolete by gunpowder. It was the moment power was passed from the knight with the sword to the engineer with the blueprint. Gunpowder didn't just shatter stone, it shattered the feudal order. Power no longer came from noble birthright, but from industrial capacity, the ability to tax, to centralize, to command foundries and supply chains. A single investment in a capital-heavy, destructive technology allowed one ruler to erase a line on the map that had existed for a millennium. The furnace and the ledger had defeated the fortress and the crown. Those same forces are at work right now. Our furnaces are microchip fabs, drone factories, and AI data centers. Our walls are firewalls and encryption standards. The power to shatter them is still for sale to the highest bidder, to the leader with the deepest pockets and the most ruthless will. So, here's the verdict I want you to debate in the comments. Who holds more power today, the general with an army, or the engineer with an algorithm? Let me know your decision. And if you believe that the most important moments in history are really detective stories, written in invoices and blueprints, subscribe for more investigations into the archives of humanity. Your next case file arrives tomorrow.